We're now live, Chair.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Anybody else that may be listening, good evening to the committee and the attendees. Are there any apologies? No, right. So I'll do the substitutions in a minute. I've got one or two announcements to get through. You just bear with me. Abu Malik has unfortunately gone sick today. I'm not quite sure what's wrong with him. Just hope it's not the variant. But there's nobody to cover for him, so I'm going to have to defer item 9 for tonight's meeting. It's Snabscott, really, so we'll have to pick up on that sometime. Carl, who's doing item 6, has to leave after he's done the introduction of his report so that he can get to another meeting. Item 12, Ingrid has already asked 2 questions, and can I ask everybody to either ask their questions tonight or get them into Victoria by 5 o'clock tomorrow. They'll be guillotined at 5 o'clock tomorrow, and that's because we don't know if the respondees are going to be able to answer all the questions if there are any coming through, and they are pretty much against it at the moment at the George Eliot Hospital and the CCG. So if you can do that, any questions that don't come up tonight need to be in by 5 o'clock tomorrow, otherwise they won't get asked. Thank you for that. I have Councillor Doherty substituting for Councillor Daffern, Councillor Evans substituting for Councillor Llewellyn-Nash, Councillor Walmsley / Elliott substituting for Councillor Tandy, and we've got Councillor Guttridge substituting for Councillor Brown. Is that it? Thank you very much. The minutes of the meeting of the 10th of December, can somebody move those to a correct record?
Agree that, Chair.
Thank you. Is that agreed?
Happy to second that.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any hands, so I'm going to take it that there's no dissent to that and approve those minutes. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Guttridge.
Yeah, I'd like to make a declaration of interest that my wife works for the NHS.
Right, thank you. No more. Thank you very much. Item 5, public consultation. I've got 2 public speakers. One is Mrs. Condacour and the other one is Councillor Condacour. And we'll call them when we get to the items. Mrs. Condacour is down for a few. Included, she's down for 6, 8, 9 and 12. Obviously 9 is gone, so she won't be on those at all. So we'll call them at the time when we do the item. Right. Item 6. Carl, you're it. Warwickshire Police update.
Lovely, thank you. Victoria, able to share the screen with everybody, please?
Sorry, give me 1 second. Sorry about the delay, everyone. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yep. That's it. Lovely. We're good to go.
Yep.
Lovely. Okay. Well, firstly, it's Chief Inspector Carl Faulkner from Warwickshire Police. Thank you very much for inviting me to the scrutiny panel this afternoon. I've got a short presentation really around some of the issues we've faced in Warwickshire and Warwickshire Police around COVID. So it's just a brief overview of where we've been over the last 12 months really in terms of the actual new legislation and changes. A little bit of an update around Warwickshire as a whole, leading into information around Nuneaton and Bedworth. And then really some information about the enforcement that we've done in Warwickshire, fixed penalty notices and legislation to finish really. So Victoria, if you could move on, please. Okay, so I think it's really important that we all recognise, because we've all been through this change and it is difficult. Certainly the changes that we've seen over the last 12 months, certainly with the different types of legislation, it's really important that we reflect on those changes to understand not just the pressures in policing, but the pressures across the emergency services, third-party sector and businesses. It's been quite difficult. So obviously from the first point one on the 26th of March, the health protection regulations came into fruition, if you like, and we saw large increases in COVID-related incidents across the county. And that sort of continued in peaks and troughs as we went on. The 13th of May, the coronavirus restrictions legislation came in post that first initial lockdown on 26th of March, which started to see a bit of reopening and relaxation of those of that legislation, which then sort of gave the general public a bit of freedom. And we saw an increase in gatherings and open spaces, pubs and takeaways and social distancing, which brought a different dynamic as throughout those two particular points at 1 and 2, we did find that we were trying to sort of embed new legislation change and react to how policing was going to formulate over that period. It was almost like standing up a separate part or new agency through that new legislation. So the 28th of May, we saw a contact trace go live in England and Scotland, and we started to see then breaches of isolation being reported to us. And again, a new dynamic that we had to try and face. Which came about in varying forms, which then led on to another change on the 1st of June, and we saw amendment point 3 of the register of the restrictions, with car showrooms, outdoor sports amenities, the like, and non-food markets opening. But importantly for the police, we did see that you had up to obviously 6 people in the public that were allowed to meet together outside of households and not in households. So we saw at that point very large increases in gatherings. Social distancing was certainly a large issue at that point in time, and we saw influxes and volumes really of people going to beauty spots across the county. So we did see quite a difference in change at that point, and it's probably good to say at this stage that as of the last presentation I did back in July last year, we do police by the 4 E's. And those 4 E's at that particular time in the legislation was very much about engage and explain and educate rather than enforce. So at this particular time, there was not a great deal of activity in terms of handing fixed penalty notices out, as of the wanton wish from our Chief Constable, which we all agreed with. So on the 8th of June, travellers arriving from outside of the UK were quarantined for 14 days when they came, and we saw border force reported coming into us. So another dynamic we had to cope and deal with. And then on the 15th of June, we saw the remainder of the regulations and restrictions sort of be relaxed. So we saw almost a complete relaxation of the general opening of retail shops, public-facing businesses, hairdressers and the like. But we did see then increased reports of social distancing at the shops, breaches of COVID regulations more and more. So the increase in demand on policing services was becoming greater. And all the time we were wholly not aware of the effects that would have on the public through the virus and the spread of the virus at the time. So the 4th of July was probably the biggest effect and increase that we saw up until this point in history, really. With the pubs reopening, we saw a lot of activity in terms of people gathering. There was no social distancing, and the mix of alcohol and almost that independence, if you like, of people being able to socialise became a real issue. Policing challenges across the county, not just in Nuneaton. On the 24th of July, the law to wear face coverings came into power, and I think it was at this point we were having discussions at the last scrutiny panel, I believe, around how we were going to deal with that face covering legislation. Victoria, next one, please. Thank you. So the 31st of July, we saw gyms, pools and other indoor close contact places open. And on the 12th of October at 0.5 there, we actually went into tier 1, so still very low in terms of the restrictions. But again, people were feeling very independent, jovial. We're getting there. The general ethos was, yes, we're starting to lose the virus and we can start to get back to normality. And then all of a sudden on the 5th of November, we were hit with another lockdown. And again, we've gone from almost complete restriction loss to a point where we were locked down again, which was, I don't think at that time, as strict as the first lockdown, but nonetheless, it was still a lockdown. And at that point, we saw a change again in activity amongst the public, and obviously having to cope with, again, further legislation change. But at the same time, we found that businesses were trying to adapt to keep open. So we had businesses that started to sell toilet rolls, for example, that would say that they were then essential businesses to stay open. And different dynamics that were playing out as people were trying to be more or use more initiative to try and get around the COVID variants. So on the 2nd of December, we went into tier 3 and Christmas was clearly on its way. So Warwickshire Police was definitely in the planning stage for thinking, right, OK, what is going to happen over Christmas? And it was being mooted at the time by the government that actually we potentially could unlock completely for 4 to 5 days, maybe a week. So people starting to think, actually, this is looking really good. And then on the 31st of December, when it actually did come about, that's when we saw, up until this point again, was the biggest amount of demand that we saw on that one particular evening. So we hadn't seen any, we'd seen volume across the period, like I said, and trying to cope with it. But on this particular evening, as you would have expected, the volume was absolutely huge. That led to obviously the 6th of January, where we're in our current lockdown. And again, because we've had a step change through tiers, one lockdown released and back into another lockdown, then into this current lockdown, we're seeing further legislation change and different types of issues. So for all that period, like I stated last time, last scrutiny panel, we do have a COVID cell set up and a very structured response to COVID in force. Around operational, tactical and strategic responses, reporting into government around what we're doing and how we're trying to achieve things. And that is basically a national picture across all forces. It's important to reiterate that we don't have any police powers around social distancing either. That's really quite important to point out. But our police approach does remain the same around engage, explain, encourage, and then enforce as a last resort. But you'll probably all remember that Priti Patel, not so many weeks ago now, did actually go on TV and state that police will move to an enforcement stage a lot quicker than we have previously done. And I think it's also important for me to state at this stage, just so we've got a little theme running through the presentation, that the points that I've previously mentioned, you'll have noticed some numbers in red. Well, those numbers I've actually carried through to some of the charts and bar charts in the next couple of slides, just to show you where those benchmarks are, to try and recognise how we see rises and falls in crime. So Victoria, please, next one. So this is total recorded crime and all incidents in Warwickshire, not just Nuneaton and Bedworth, but all of Warwickshire. And the first chart in the top left-hand corner is based on total recorded crime of 2019 versus 2020. So the blue line that you will see is 2019 crime figures, and the orange bar chart is 2020. So you'll see at point 1, we've got point 1, 2, 3, 4 following through to point 7 in red on that bar chart. So they're the specific points that I've spoken about in the previous slides. So you'll see at point 1, which is the sort of implementation of that first lockdown, we see that crime was already a little bit lower than the 2019 position, but during April and March, there is quite a significant drop in crime during that lockdown. And that has been seen as a national trend now, that when we have a lockdown, there is almost an expectation that crime will decrease. And that's based around acquisitive type crimes, burglaries, thefts, etc., etc. So at point 2, we started to see that small relaxation of some of the restrictions that led into 3, where we had that third almost different change again of the restrictions, which you can then start to see that the crime starts to rise almost to the same sort of category in terms of volume as the 2019 figures. And at point 4 is where the pubs opened. So you'll see that the crimes have started to sort of just teeter over the top of the 2019 figures, which also fed through to August. And then September we see that start of a decline, where at 0.5 we'd entered into tier 1. So trying to put some sense into the figures there, we believe that people, having seen that the pubs had relaxed, we'd had an initial sort of blip in crime figures through alcohol, acquisitive crimes and like, because people could actually move around more freely. And people then starting to get used to the situation they were in. So September saw that slight decline again, leading to 5, and at 0.6 was the next sort of major lockdown, where we see again what we thought would occur once the lockdown happened, leading to December. And interesting to note, as of January, that has started to plateau and come back up again to the same sort of levels. So on the right hand side, not very clear to see, unfortunately, and I apologise for this, but the total recorded incident comparison just gives an idea of the sort of policing we've had to deal with in terms of volume. So the top one, which is very difficult to see on the left hand side, the actual wording. So that's from January to June last year in terms of total incidents, and you'll see it's 78,000 in terms of number of the grey bar. So that's incidents, not crime reports, just to be clear. The orange bar is non-COVID ASB in the region of 5,700, and the blue is a COVID-related ASB in the lower region. And then the bar below that is then from July through to December. And again, you're looking at total volumes of around 72,000 incidents at the police. So we're looking at, over that 12-month period, around just over about 150,000 total incidents the police have dealt with during that COVID period. And that bottom graph there just illustrates how that corresponds to 2019. So the blue line being 2019 and the bottom being the orange 2020. And conversely, when you compare the two charts, you do see that from the March and April period, compared to the top chart where you see total recorded crime reduce during the lockdown, the incidents for the police have risen. And that has then only carried on and carried above that 2019 figure up until that August position, where then it started to level out and be slightly lower than the 2019 figures, which is interesting. Next slide, please, Victoria. So this is Warwickshire ASB and domestic abuse figures, and I put domestic abuse on there because there was interest last scrutiny panel around domestic abuse, and it is an interesting picture and how we see what happens during that lockdown process. So the top bar chart where you have the blue and orange bars really does illustrate how antisocial behaviour has acted over that period during COVID last year, and you'll see from obviously the March point to April, where we have the initial lockdown, that the ASB figures really do shoot up through the roof, and that's COVID and normal ASB together, and then it starts to plateau as it goes on through the year. But again, the ASB figures are higher than that of 2019, and the percentage figures you see on the left hand side of the screen in the top left hand corner sort of illustrates by percentage that the change that you see. So the April almost 150% change or increase is where you see that increase from the lockdown initially. So we see that total recorded crimes went down fairly significantly at that point. Our incident figures went up, and ASB certainly went up at that point, which is really interesting. Then just below that on the bottom left hand corner is the figures around domestic abuse crime. So that's crimes reported and domestic abuse incidents reported to police on a 2019 to 2020 comparison. And the interesting thing to see here is that obviously the yellow line is the 2019 figures, whereas the 2020 block in grey is 2020. And all of those grey bars up until the point that we actually get to November are higher than the 2019 figures. And even during the lockdown period at 0.1 there, we see that they are higher than the 2019 figures, and it almost plateaus and carries the same sort of line and pattern that the 2019 bar does. And that's the lockdown at that time, and we see that decrease in domestic abuse reports to the police. But it's also interesting to note that, having spoken to domestic abuse professionals in Warwickshire and across our third-party sectors and other DA organisations, their referrals that went into their organisations actually were high and were increasing at the time. So we saw domestic abuse crime reports reducing, but at the same time those referrals to those organisations were increasing. So you would surmise from that point of view that people were in their homes unable really to contact and make that contact with police, particularly at that point, or unable to because they were locked in an environment that they found it difficult, is one assumption. And on the right just there is the percentage changes that you will see that I've put in there, similar to the ASB figures again. So you can see that they're all pretty much in a positive position until you get to the latter end of November and December. And that bottom figure of 5.41% is the average of that 12-month period. Thanks, Victoria. Next one. OK, so this is Nuneaton Bedworth crime information for over the next couple of slides. And the first one is around antisocial behaviour. And again, it builds a very interesting picture, really. So the bottom left-hand graph there, I've put the sort of the benchmarks in terms of the red figure, the red lines to show you when those particular points were. So at point 1, again, was the lockdown. We saw instantly again in April that we've seen a huge increase in that COVID-related antisocial behaviour, which is the blue bar, the grey bar being normal antisocial behaviour. That's sort of followed through to May and started to reduce then at point 3 when we see that the restrictions have relaxed. So a bit of common sense thinking there shows that when the restrictions are released, the ASB certainly starts to decline and we get back into a state of normality, which is very much the case. But what we didn't see for the lockdown at point 6, we were expecting a huge increase in antisocial behaviour, but that actually didn't materialise. We did see a percentage of COVID ASB come, but not as much as we did think. And then obviously it's reduced again for December. And then in the top right hand corner, there's a graph which I did include last time at the last scrutiny panel. And it is a little bit difficult to see, but I have put it there because if you look at the period for March, April, at the pinnacle of the linear graph, the triangle, the top line is actually the orange line, which is Nuneaton and Bedworth. So at the time, Nuneaton and Bedworth was presenting the most in terms of volume for anywhere in the county around ASB in terms of a district comparison. But as time has gone on, you will now see, and this is difficult to see, that the orange line actually sits well below some of the districts. So actually the ASB in Nuneaton and Bedworth is lower than that than some of the districts at this moment in time. Thank you, Victoria. Next one. OK, so in terms of the district's domestic abuse, I'll put this on there as an interesting fact just to see with this top bar graph in the left hand corner, just to see in comparison to the other charts we've shown through Warwickshire to how domestic abuse has sort of materialised and ran through sort of that period, and see if it's followed the same sort of pattern that we've seen with other crimes. And actually it hasn't really in many senses, apart from when you get to November and December and we do see that decline during the 2020 period. But actually all the way through the year from January through to October, the 2020 figures have remained consistently higher than the 2019 figures. And that's probably largely in part of all the agencies that are involved in domestic abuse, interventions, victim care, etc., are becoming better and better at what they do. And there's more avenues and options for victims and survivors to contact agencies in order to try and help them as well. So that's the assumption and theories that are going behind it. And again, November and December, you find that the 2020 figures have dropped off at the last lockdown that occurred at November, which we've already spoken about. I've also added in there the cross-cutting themes on the right-hand side as well, which is really interesting, which we do monitor through the county council and through the policing. So alcohol-related violence with and without injury is down by 26%, and drug-related violence with and without injury is also down by 44%. And the bottom left-hand figures are overall crime figures in Nuneaton and Bedworth, which I thought you would find interesting, which I didn't include last time. Please bear with me because these figures do change on a daily basis, as does the next slide's figures. But just to update you, and this is not on the slide, so when we're looking at violence with injury, Nuneaton and Bedworth is currently down by 18%. Violence without injury is currently up by 7%, so it's not 9.7, it is 7%. Sexual offences are down by 16%. Robbery, and I'll split these down better so that you can understand them. So business robbery is down by 58%. Personal robbery is down by 38%. Vehicle offences are down by 26%. Theft of bicycles, that is down by 38%. Shoplifting is down by 27%. Criminal damage is down by 14%. And really interestingly, burglary, or personal burglary, is down by 48% in Nuneaton and Bedworth compared to the Warwickshire figure, which is 40%. And burglary business is also down by 37%. ASB remains to be the one particular crime that stays higher at 34%, and violence without injury also stays high. And just to clarify what violence without injury is, we're talking, and this does make sense when you look at the dynamics of what's at play. Violence without injury are those offences which we would say are malicious communications, stalking, harassment, online crimes that you would expect that potentially domestic abuse offenders are going towards to try and abuse their partners because they can't get physical contact with them. So that's where we see that rise. And on the right hand side there, the other offences is just a bit of a pictorial graph really to show you where those crimes are sort of fluctuating. So the ASB is obviously higher and the others are certainly a lot lower. Okay, next slide, please, Victoria. Victoria, next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so this is actual COVID enforcement information, and this is what is changing on a daily basis now. And it's quite interesting. So the chart on the left-hand side is based on January figures alone, and it does replicate what's happened throughout the rest of the previous 12 months. So just to explain what the chart means, on the left-hand side, on the naught or the x-axis, if you like, it's got FC staff. Well, that's face covering staff. Then you have face coverings public, gatherings, leave home, business breach, mass gatherings, isolation, and then the totals at the end. What you'll find interesting is the orange bar. That is representative of Nuneaton and Bedworth, and these are all the areas that we look at in terms of issuing fixed penalty notices and have done. So since the start of the pandemic, we have now in Warwickshire issued, to this morning's figures, 840 fixed penalty notices. That's a total across Warwickshire. You'll see in terms of Nuneaton and Bedworth, I've put them down in bold on the right hand side there. So in terms of gatherings, I'm currently at 64. When the rule of 6 was in, we issued a 22, face covering 7, business breaches 5, etc., etc., and you can read that for yourselves. This morning figures, and I obviously didn't have a chance to update this presentation, but that chart in the top left-hand corner, the black or the grey one, it has changed considerably. So now we're seeing that the number of fixed penalty tickets, and certainly in terms of gatherings, is higher than anywhere else in the county. And rest assured that is not because the problem is bigger in Nuneaton and Bedworth than anywhere else, but we're being a lot more proactive in North Warwickshire than we have been in terms of policing capacity and than perhaps we have been over the last few months, and that's why we're seeing an increase in those issues of tickets. And the total number of fixed penalty notices to the point of when this was written is 110 in Nuneaton and Bedworth, and that will increase certainly as time goes on. Certainly from the information, obviously, the Priti Patel has told us to enforce quicker. That is exactly what we're now doing to try and help the public not get COVID. Okay, Victoria, next one, please.
The correct one.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much. So this is just about lessons learned and challenges, and it does replicate a little bit from the last one, to be fair, because we are seeing the same one. So I'll just pick out a few of the ones that are particularly different. The change in legislation is a given. I've already spoken about that. Christmas and New Year were a real challenge for us. And going forward, we're trying now to plan and manage what that looks like for particular pinch points going through the year. So we do plan on a calendar where we have certain days, public holidays and the like, which might cause us issues based against what we might see the legislation taking, or the line that the legislation might be going in the future. So we do plan around that. But it was definitely a case of the public thought that independence had been sort of granted back to them during that Christmas period. And I think having been told by the government that perhaps we're looking at 4 to 5 days, and then it was down to 1, there was a few exceptions from people, and they did just chance their arm in many aspects, I think, to be fair. One thing that is showing a bit of a worrying pattern and a trend, as time's passed on, we are seeing that people are using the pandemic and the COVID related legislation in malicious ways to get at others, and that's certainly planning out a little bit in terms of domestics and certainly antisocial behaviour in neighbourhood disputes. So we do see that long-standing neighbourhood disputes, particularly, and I'm talking ones that have been ongoing for years and years, are starting to use the legislation against their neighbours, which we are attuned to, but at the same time it does cause us additional demand, because even that we still have to look into every single one. Interestingly, the first lockdown we saw nitrous oxide use, which I did touch on last time. So the little silver canisters that you may have you've heard about previously, and teenagers up to early 20s sort of age range are using those as a mini high. This time round in the lockdown, we're actually seeing an increase in cannabis use. Now, we don't understand at this minute in time what that is for or why that's the case, or whether we're just being more proactive and finding it. But we're actually also seeing an increase in cannabis factories across the county as well, and in Nuneaton and Bedworth. And I think this may be because members of the public that are utilising walking their dogs more or getting out to exercise more are actually recognising smells and seeing potentially homes that would normally be open with curtains in the day that are consistently closed. And we're getting those reports and that intelligence coming through that potentially it might be a cannabis factory. We will go out and do our assessments. And yes, there is quite a few that we're finding. Policing vaccination centres. Obviously, we are aware where they are. There's been lots of planning through our tactical planning teams as to potential issues that might be caused through protesters or the other nefarious activity around them. But all of our neighbourhood teams are visiting regularly, and to date we have had no issues whatsoever at any of the vaccination centres. We've not seen a surge in members of the public going because they're concerned they're not going to get a vaccine, etc., etc. It's been very well organised, and I have to praise the District Borough Council, the NHS, and others around the management and the sort of the logistics around what's been planned. It really is quite a phenomenal feat for what they're achieving at the moment, and the number of people they're getting vaccinated. It's really good. Managing social distancing obviously is still we can't do that, but it's very much there is an opinion out there by the public that we should be managing that. Especially now the new strain, or the South African strain of the virus, is sort of coming into the Midlands. And really the bottom one is probably the other one that's really caused a little bit of concern and angst amongst MPs and local councillors across the county, is that term locality in the legislation. So it's a known fact that the government said that you must stay in your locality, which is you must stay within your village, your town, or your part of a city. And it is very difficult to police that because people are travelling some distance sometimes. And at Enzerspool, we have noticed that some people, or a particular group, have travelled from the south of the county to come and use Enzerspool when it's been snowing with ice on top, because it's a little or a fad that they like swimming in ice. Way beyond me and my understanding, but we have dealt with that, and we've been down and issued fixed penalty tickets to those people that have been involved in that. So we do see that people are travelling a little bit across the county. So our senior officers have said that it's very much a case of judging the balance of what the individual is trying to do against the legislation to make sure we do manage and police that legislation properly, based on what the government have said that locality means, which is quite difficult, to be fair. But we are doing it. Okay, next slide, please, Victoria. Okay, so the next two slides really just for your information, and I don't really feel the need to go through them because I think you all know this anyway. So the key restrictions on there we all know about, and the legislation, that's fine. And then the next slide, Victoria, is really about our enforcement options. And the only real change there at the moment is the change in the £800 fine that has come about very recently. So interestingly, we've not given any £800 fines out to anybody that's in a gathering of more than 15 people in a household yet, but I'm sure that will come about. And that's just the legislation that we run by, just for information. So all in all, that's the presentation. I hope it's been informative for you. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Carl. Very precise. Mrs. Thundercore.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I mean, I'm well aware that there's, a lot of issues with trying to sort of strike the balance between, what the words actually say in the guidance and what people do, and being reasonable things. I'm a bit concerned though that it's not being very evenly sort of policed. You just said that the reason there were a lot more in Nuneaton and Bedworth was due to it being more policed, rather than it was worst part of the county, and that just seems terribly unfair. And I'm also well aware actually at my parish church, our priest got fined because other people came to a wedding in the time when you could have the weddings and things, and he was completely powerless to do anything, but he was the one that got the fine. even though he had made it clear how many people should come, etc., etc. So there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of fairness, apart from what I've seen. So I'm a bit concerned about that, because that also makes people less inclined to think, well, if so and so do that, then I can, and things. I know it's it is difficult. And the other question, sort of comment really, was that antisocial behaviour obviously has peaks and troughs, and it's much increased when there's good weather and things. So how much do you look at the forecast? How much is the policing sort of thing? Well, it's going to be a lovely summer's day. There's going to be a lot more people out and potentially more problems. How much is that taken into account, and what initiative and things are PCSOs allowed to have? Because I've not seen a PCSO around our area for quite a while. I know we did have a change of PCSO, but I don't know who the new one. I've not seen a new person wandering around and things, because I do feel that if the PCSOs sort of know the locality well, they know where they need to be at what time. Previously I've seen wandering around and I'm thinking, well, you're not going to catch many people now. Why aren't you doing it sort of at such and such a time? So it's just how flexible can they be? How much are they allowed to sort of just use their initiative? Thank you.
Okay. Yes,
any members? Because Carl has to go. Is there any members with any questions? I can't see anybody with a hand.
I've got my hand up.
I can't even find you. Sorry, Claire, I can't even find you on my list. I'm not going on here.
Chair, I think Councillor Kondarka's also a member of the public asking.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's not. She was actually supposed to come on this
Friday. Okay, all right. I'll do that. I'll do that one first. I'll call you after Claire. Councillor Kondarka.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I think fairness is really important. And one of the things we're going to get is we're going to start to come out of this as people are getting vaccinated. And the vaccinating shouldn't started about 3 weeks earlier in some places. And the Nuneaton and Bedworth was last to start vaccinating. So I think we're going to have a big problem coming out of this, as other parts of Warwickshire, with already lower levels. I mean, about 100 in Stratford and 300 parts per 100,000. And it's going to be how we're going to police keeping the Nuneaton clamped down when the parts of Warwickshire which the government decided would be vaccinated first are actually starting to get back to opening pubs and getting back to their normal lives. It's a massive problem, and obviously Nuneaton's got lots of issues, which means it's going to take longer for us to eradicate COVID in the borough as well. Another point I really am very alarmed at is the closing down of political leafleting. I totally understand why as politicians have stopped leafleting when cases were at 500 per 100,000. But we do have an issue if the government says that pizza firms can go and deliver these today perfectly legally, and come April, if the elections is it tainted by the whole politics of you can't leaflet because it's a political leaflet, but you can leaflet because it's a pizza leaflet. I know it's not really the police's job, but I think we do need to start discussing how we police. And the third point I wanted to make was about your messaging about Hartsell Hayes and places, because obviously Hartsell Hayes is our local country park. We don't have a single country park in the Nuneaton and Bedworth. We go to Hartsell Hayes or Burbage Common, which is just into Leicestershire. And I think this locality thing does need to be defined as far as Warwickshire Police is concerned, even if the government's fudged the issue, because we should, as the Nuneaton and Bedworth, be able to go to Hartsell Hayes. And for me, who lives right at the top end of Nuneaton, I went for a 57-minute cycle ride yesterday, and I went up to Higham on the Hill and back down into Wellington, and that's going into Leicestershire. But perfectly sensible thing to do for me to cycle, because I want to go away from the Nuneaton town centre. So I think it would be useful if the police would really guide a lot more, particularly when you put scary things out on Twitter saying we're policing Hartshill Hayes, just to comfort the people who are sensibly using Hartshill Hayes, that actually if you're going close to your local town, we're not policing at Chapel End or policing at the A5. We're policing for people who are travelling from north to south in the county. Thank you, Chair.
Claire?
Thanks, Chair. I wasn't aware we were here to discuss political leafleting and what have you. There are other ways of communicating with people that don't necessarily need to spread this virus around. One of the questions I've got, which is something that has been brought up to me on several occasions, is when residents are taking the trouble and risk in some cases, it's a risk to inform on COVID rule breakers who are breaking the rules in homes. There's obviously the issue of how do you verify who should actually be in that home anyway? And if you have a repeat offender or somebody who has different people visiting the homes, not necessarily all at the same time, but a steady stream of different people, how do you verify that they are having that, they are doing that? They are clearly breaking the rules, because you're not supposed to be having a steady stream of people, and you're not supposed to be having more than one person in your house, and etc., if you've bubbled up with them. But when you've got some people who are basically blagging it, how do you verify this? There have been occasions that have been reported to me that there have been large families who have claimed that they all live together and they don't, and that people pretend to be moving in when they're not. It just seems to be an unenviable and sometimes impossible task for the police to actually enforce. And quite frankly, I would love to be enforcing a lot harder, a lot sooner. So, I'm all for enforcement, but it just seems to be difficult, and I don't know how you actually do that with so many different variables.
Thank you. I don't know if you want to pick any of those up yet, Carl, or I've got 3 more speakers after this.
Yeah, I'll just cover some of the basic ones. In terms of Mrs. Condacor's questions around unfairness and policing, well, we don't. We are impartial. We have no political view. We will police across the county as best as we can with the resilience and resources that we do have. So there's no unfairness or pointed targeting at any particular community group at all. If we have the reports in, we will deal with them as we can best at the time, based on the emergency circumstances we have with our resources. The wedding I'm very well aware of, which I'm not going to comment on, as it would be remiss of me, and it has been dealt with previously. Initiatives and PCSO as well. In terms of that, if you are concerned, I can always get the details of the PCSO to you, and they can come and sit down and speak to them, or speak to you over the phone to discuss visibility and ASB within the area to make sure they are fully sighted, which can be a discussion with the sergeants as well. That's not an issue at all. In terms of Councillor Condacor and your questions, how are we going to police Warwickshire around potential fluctuations of people around vaccination? Well, that has been planned for. We have a very tight strategic and tactical plan around potential flashpoints and protests and the like, and people coming in volume to certain sites. That is planned for, but I have to say at this minute in time, I am not aware of anything across the country at all where we're seeing anything like that whatsoever. Political issues I'm not going to get involved in. Suffice to say that if we're spreading and posting leaflets in people's doors, we've got potential of spreading the virus. Hartshill Hayes and locality, yeah, in terms of locality and policing, it really is about the reasonableness of individuals' actions, really, set against the intentions of the legislation, and that's the direction that we've given our staff. So we will police those locations based on that and the fact that government legislation as it is. We are not here as a police service to rewrite parliamentary law and legislation. We just run and work by what we're told in that sense. And then Councillor Golby, in terms of residents, I completely see your point, and you are right. Verifying how we actually understand who should be in people's addresses and who shouldn't. It is a very, very difficult task. We get the reports in and we will respond, and to a degree we do try and do a lot of preventative work and making sure through our contacts with people that is what we're trying to restrict and stop happening. If we do get reports of people, and we have had many, where we've had house parties, people turning up for barbecues and God knows what else that you can imagine. When we get there, it's a case of the officers at that point trying to establish who they are, what they're doing there, and if they shouldn't be there, full stop, because they shouldn't be out their home addresses, they'll get tickets. And the new power, I'm sure, where the £800 ticket is issued, I'm sure there may well be a few coming in the next few days, if not weeks. So we do try our best. It is very difficult, but all I can say is just please rest assured, if you do make those reports to us, we will try our best to make sure we understand what's going on at those addresses, but at the same time being sensitive around who's made that call at the same point, because we are aware of those long-term neighbourhood disputes, and we don't want to be in a position where we're causing further harm to victims when we really don't want to be in that position.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Elliott, Councillor Walmsley and Councillor Hancock. Can you be as brief as possible, please, when you're doing this, course Carl does need to get away. Councillor Elliott.
Thanks, Chair. Mine is very quick, but it's pertinent to a working party that we're on. You said that there was an increase in nitrous oxide use during the first lockdown. The implication is that that's gone away. Could you just expand on how big the nitrous oxide problem still is, or has it disappeared? Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. I have to tell the truth, I'm not exactly sure in terms of the volume and the complete problems that we have across the county in terms of nitrous oxide, other than the fact, and suffice to say, that we are still pulling large amounts of different types of nitrous oxide canisters from different varying places across the county. So it still is a problem, and it very much is a problem. It's just it's a case of on my PowerPoint, I was just pointing out a difference in change in terms of what we're seeing around cannabis farms and cannabis factories. And actually, it may well be the case that cannabis use runs in line with the nitrous oxide use as well, one and the same, kids, teenagers and young people trying to get a hit from it. So yeah, but forgive me if I misled you, that's not the case.
Thank you. Councillor Walmsley.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to come back in the light of a comment you just made in response there, that you're not here to rewrite parliamentary legislation. I think we can have a debate all day about whether X, Y or Z should or should not be included in the legislation. However, it comes back to the point in relation to particularly around Hartshill Hayes. As you'll know, the rules and the law set out here come under, as you've said very clearly, the Health Protection and as subsequently amended. But actually, in those regulations, there is nothing in the law about locality. It states black or white, you either have a legal reason to leave your home or you do not. The point is that the locality is in guidance, not under the law. So I want to really question and drill down into this, upon what basis we are trying to challenge people. In fact, one of an exemption specifically is to attend a local open space, which does not require payment, which obviously Hartshill Hayes, as the example given by other colleagues earlier, is. So where actually are we getting the legal basis for the policing for those actions which you were describing earlier?
Yes, very good question. It's a case of, so there are legal exemptions to leave your home, as you know, exercise being probably the most prevalent, other than the fact that you can go shopping. So the legal basis is that people are leaving their homes to go and exercise, and they're using open spaces to go and exercise and use those as excuses with their family to go and do that, and or go with one other person to those open spaces. The locality issue that is, as you say, is guidance for policing is where the issue becomes, because it is not a mandated legislation law. It's a case of real guidance for policing. So it puts us in a very difficult position that we're then having to use our discretion based on what we've been told by government. And I've had this discussion with MPs so far around what that means, because they have, again, like yourselves, constituents that are concerned where they can and can't go, how far can they travel, where can they go, etc., etc. All we can tell our staff is exactly what the government have told us. So they've given us that guidance, we tell our staff that guidance. But like I said earlier, this is very much about making sure that we can police the pandemic, making sure that we try and reduce the spread of the virus using our discretion and our best known ability to make sure that people aren't travelling further than they really need to in order to get that exercise. So it is a little bit, it's around discretion and understanding from a public's perspective what is unreasonable and what's reasonable.
Thank you. Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, can I thank Carl for his presentation? It was really useful having that verbal presentation with the chart. And if I could just make a friendly suggestion, Chair, and it's in relation to anybody, whether it be the council or anybody else. We only get our paperwork printed off in black and white, so sometimes it's difficult if they're coloured charts. Bar charts are often very good. Anyway, so yeah, and also, Chair, I'm sure we as a panel want to place on record our thanks through you, Chair, for all the work the police and other emergency services are continuing to do under very difficult circumstances. But Chair, I'd just like to go back to the issue over domestic abuse, because it's a really serious matter. And when I've asked the question previously, the answer that we've had is that your figures have been static. Well, clearly they're no longer static anyway. And, you know, all around the country, it has shown an increase in them. But I'm particularly interested because Carl mentioned, although there might not be police reports, and we can understand why people may not come straight to the police but go through other organisations. I'd be interested to know how we can improve on that relationship between the public, the police and the other organisations with domestic abuse. Because clearly them referrals have gone up to the other organisations. And I'll just leave it at that, Chair, because I know Carl's going to go. I had a couple of other things, but I'll perhaps put them through to yourself after the meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, I mean, you are right. So the figures from domestic abuse are no longer static, and you've seen the report that I've given so far. But just to give you some sort of clarity around what's been done in terms of policing and with some of the third-party sectors, agencies and domestic abuse referral mechanisms. We've put out between all of us lots and lots of social media, which has been a joined-up approach to try and engage with people that are suffering with domestic abuse. We've set up specific emerging trends meetings internally so that we can try and monitor and manage how that domestic abuse picture looks and how we can try and react to it. We've even gone to the point of going to separate supermarkets. There's specific apps on phones that people can contact and get through. The IDVAs through Refuge, they have helped us no end in terms of how we can push that comms piece out. So we have done a hell of a lot of work across the policing remit and through those other areas to try and make sure that people that are suffering domestic abuse can somehow get a channel into a service that can assist them. Again, there's stuff that we can improve on, and that emerging trends meeting that we got through the domestic abuse teams is being monitored to make sure that if there are gaps, we can try and fill them and make it better for people and victims and survivors.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Carl. Councillor Wolseley, so you've got your hand up still, but I'm not going to bring you back in because Carl has got to get away. That was made clear earlier on. So thank you, Carl. Hope that made it late for your next meeting. So thank you very much for that presentation and best of luck. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, item 7. Addressing teen conception in Nuneaton and Bedworth. Not guilty, Your Honour. Helen, welcome, Helen.
Councillor Longton. Hi, yeah, my name is Helena, so I'm the Sexual Health Commissioner for Warwickshire. I've just been asked to give you a brief overview report as to where we are currently in what we're doing to address levels of teenage conception in the borough. I'll presume that everybody's had a chance to read the report, so I won't go into it in great depth. I'll just give you a quick overview. So it is worth noting that obviously in the last 12 months with restrictions to and fro in, that will have influenced the way services have been delivering to young people. But I must reiterate that services have continued to be available throughout and will continue to be available. So the report gives a brief overview of the ONS data, which is what we work to, and then also what we're doing in the terms of partnership working to address the figures that we get. So the ONS data, I'm sure you've been told previously, runs between 18 and 24 months behind the actual. So I'm sure you'll appreciate the difficulties that poses for us when we're trying to work with data. So what is the actual rate? We don't know. We can only go with what we've got from 2018. The more recent data from ONS for 2019 just gives us a county overview, which, although is reasonably helpful, it doesn't help us drill down and get to the actual detail that we need to address it per borough and district. So overall, we can tell you that the 2019 data that we've got so far from ONS, across the county, the teenage conception rate is going down and it is below the England average. However, when we look at the 2018 data that we've got that allows us to look at the borough and district level, we can see that Nuneaton and Bedworth at that time had a conception rate of 23.2 per 1,000 women. All of these figures are per 1,000. So that's a slight increase from 2017, but it is worth remembering that's 49 women as opposed to 47. So although we're saying 23.2, sometimes it's hard to get that into your mind as what does that equate to? And that's 49 women on that particular statistic. So we are expecting some further ONS data that will show us Q3, again at a county level. We should have got that in November of 2020. Obviously, with everything else that's going on, we've got some delays. So as soon as we've got that information, we'll be able to enact whatever it's telling us. So in a way of addressing those figures that we've got, the addressing teenage conception meetings that were brought about a number of years ago continue to meet quarterly. And you can see in the report they're made up with quite a wide variety of partnership agencies. And in the last 12 months, we've broadened that membership that now includes community midwifery services, because I think that gives us some anecdotal information about the here and now that we don't get from ONS data. And we've also got data now from BPAS. So that is the abortion services that run across our county and in large swathes of the UK. So that again just gives us some anecdotal information, and it just helps us to build a picture of what's happening in the here and now. As part of that teenage conception meeting, what we work through what's called, snappy title, the Teenage Pregnancy Prevention Framework Self-Assessment Toolkit. Doesn't roll off the tongue, does it? But that basically is what it says. It's a self-assessment toolkit. It enables us to assess ourselves against 10 key factors that Public Health England have identified. And that helps us as a partnership work out where our gaps are. What are we doing really, really well? What could we work on a little bit more? What do we really need to focus on? So we're just working through currently refreshing that toolkit for ourselves. As we've changed our membership of the group, it's time to refresh. It was last refreshed in 2019, and that was following one of the workshops that was run by the County Council. And again, that was in November 2019. So it's time for a quick refresh. I've also included in here for you that since they changed in the RSE statutory provision set out by the Department of Education, Warwickshire County Council has supported primary and secondary schools across the county with the offer to fund 1 year's subscription for each primary and secondary school to help them get ready for that statutory guidance. Was supposed to be brought in September, but they've allowed a delay obviously because of everything else, and they've got till June to do that. And so far in Nuneaton and Bedworth, 9 primary schools and 4 secondary schools have taken us up on that offer, which is really, really good. A lot of schools already had membership to the 2 associations that the Department of Education flagged as being very good. So just to try and put a little bit more context around it, the report shows you the pharmacies that we've got currently across across the borough that offer emergency hormonal contraception, or EHC for short. And you can see that in 2019-20 we had 17 pharmacies offering the service across the borough. That's really good coverage, and they dispensed on 742 occasions. Now I can't tell you that that's 742 individuals. We will have some frequent flyers into those pharmacies, and so discussions take place at that point about safeguarding referrals. In 2020 and 21, up to the beginning of December, which is when I had the data for it, we had 16 pharmacies still delivering, which is really good. But they have dispensed 298 prescriptions for EHC. We can surmise why that might be, but some pharmacists did have to stop some of their enhanced primary care service activity because of the pressure of being put on with everything else. So a lot of GPs were saying go to your pharmacist first, and that was a lot of the publication that was coming out from the Department of Health. So they did stop some of that work. However, we did have a couple of pharmacists across the borough that didn't stop that work, and actually they went above and beyond with all of their primary enhanced services, which was brilliant. So there was a clear offer there for all of our young people. Those services resumed as normal in October and continue to deliver really well. We've also got a C-card scheme, which people might have heard of before. So this is a condom distribution scheme. It's used nationally, very widely, lots of research into its success rates, and it's particularly for young people between 13 and 25 years. And you'll see in the report that we've got quite good coverage across Nuneaton and Bedworth. It is specific to parts of Nuneaton and Bedworth North, and parts of Atherstone, which were our highest ward areas at the time when that contract was agreed. And then we go on to Health Store at Hatter's Space. That is still available for young people. Obviously, since March, the one-to-one and the drop-in facility did have to close down due to restrictions. However, Targeted Youth Support colleagues and our Integrated Sexual Health Service stepped up their social media information, and were saying to young people that services are still available for you. You just needed to make contact with the main Integrated Sexual Health Service at the George Eliot, and they then accessed click and collect for emergency hormonal contraception, click and collect for condoms, click and collect for all sorts of contraception. And so the offer was still there for all of those young people. So that leads us on to the Integrated Sexual Health Service as a whole. Again, the service has remained open and fully available to everybody throughout the previous years, and will continue to do so in line with their national guidance, which is quite stringent with it being a clinical setting. So you'll see in there that the main hub at George Eliot has remained fully operational. Drop-in facilities have stopped, obviously. However, face-to-face appointments are still available. So what you would ring the main number, you would have you'd speak to a nurse who would undergo a telephone appointment with you, and depending on what you were presenting with, you will either be signposted to the online digital offer, so you can get a screening kit sent to your home address, where you complete that task and you post it back off and you get the results, or you will be brought into clinic if it was clinically necessary to do so. And that includes some methods of contraception. So for those people that need long-acting reversible contraception, they would have been still brought into service. That hasn't stopped. And all under 16-year-olds aren't offered the online testing offer. They have to go into service to receive that screening, because then they can do the whole safeguarding and vulnerability screening as well, which is really, really important. And then to add on to that, the School Health and Wellbeing Service, which Compass deliver on behalf of Warwickshire County Council, continues to offer Year 6 and Year 9 health needs assessments. And again, that's questionnaires that are age appropriate on health and wellbeing. And those school nurses are well versed in all contraception and sexual health needs for young people. And if they can't undertake the work that young person needs specifically within that setting, they will be referred into one of our other services. So I think to conclude, that's everything that we're doing in the borough. I hope you agree that we're actually doing a lot, but it does continue to remain a focus for us, and we'll continue to work on it alongside other things.
Thank you, Helen. Any member? Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thank you very much, Helen. I mean, clearly the whole of this topic does have wider health and social impacts that are really important. You know, it's not just this direct topic, it has a further spread as such. But what I'm particularly interested in, Helen, is the C card scheme. And, you know, whilst we see the list of pharmacies, there's only actually one listed as in Bedworth. And I'm just wondering, you know, I think it also says that you're looking to increase the pharmacies that will be in it, and that's good. I'd like to know how we can do that, bearing in mind maybe some of the outlying areas in Bedworth. If you look at perhaps Kersley, Ash Green area, is right on the Coventry border. So are people allowed to use services in Coventry, indeed if they deliver it there? Because it's probably easier for somebody to nip across into Holbrooks as to get into Bedworth town centre. It's certainly a valuable service, and it's not a direct comparison, but when you go into pharmacies for this type of service, it's a bit like when we fought for a long time to get needle exchange services and things like that. And, you know, it's about having that access to it. Or is it a fact that we haven't got so many pharmacies listed? Is it because the pharmacies are able to refuse to do it, or is it just that we haven't approached them yet?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hancock. No, so the C card scheme is a voluntary scheme for pharmacists, as is the provision of emergency hormonal contraception. So they would be approached, and that it would be up to them as to whether they felt that they could deliver that or not. Sometimes the barriers to pharmacists will be if they don't have a private consultation area, because they do need to take, you know, young people off to have quite an in-depth conversation with them, and there's quite a lot of form filling out you know, as a safeguarding measure for those young people, and there's specific vulnerability screening that has to take place. So that's sometimes a barrier to pharmacists taking place. The C card scheme is actually run by Coventry and Warwickshire Partnership Trust. So yes, young people can access across Coventry and Warwickshire pharmacists that do have it. So yes, those people that live in Ash Green and Kersley could go into Coventry if that was nearer to them in a pharmacy had the C card scheme. They're currently working, because they do a lot of face-to-face training for pharmacists on how to undertake the work. Obviously that has had to stop. They've got a list of 4 or 5 additional pharmacists in the borough, and equally secondary schools that would like to take up the C card offer. And that what they're doing at the moment is just changing all of their training to be an online offer. So as soon as that gets up and running, again, they'll be able to roll out their training, which means that we'll have more locations available. And what we're trying to do is break out of just looking at pharmacies. So we are looking at secondary schools. We're looking at working with our targeted youth support colleagues to try and broaden out, where do young people go? That's where we need those schemes to run. So those young people can do that. So I hope that's answered that question.
Thank you. I've got no more members showing on my screen, and nobody's shouting at me. So thank you, Helen, for that.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to Becky sitting there.
She is.
Very quiet as your backup. But OK, thank you both for that. See you again sometime. Thank you.
Yeah, see you very soon. Thanks, Barry. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Right, next item. Philip, are you doing this, or is David doing it?
No, I think I will do it.
Okay.
We'll defer to David, perhaps on the questions. What I thought I'd do, Councillor Longden, is to I last appeared in front of this committee back in October, just to give you an update on what's been going on the various things I've been involved with, some updates on some figures and recruitment and crime, and then take some questions if you're happy with that.
Okay, thank you.
So, crime rates. Obviously, Chief Inspector Faulkner gave you some figures. I think up to the end of last year. I've actually got them now up to pretty well this week, and I've got the Nuneaton figures. So the total overall recorded crimes since the beginning of the year, which, as you know, our year begins on the 1st of April, is down 12%. Violence with injury down 18%, personal robbery down 38%, residential burglaries down 48%, which is good news. Vehicle crime down 27%, which is also good news. Domestic abuse is about 2% up, but he did explain that there had been quite a lot of victims who'd gone direct to a number of organisations which I fund, like Refuge and others, and but the actual reported crime of domestic abuse is only up 2%. So a lot of those figures plainly are affected by the pandemic and COVID, but it does mean there's a lot less victims than there were this time last year, which is good news for all of us. To being fair, one or two figures have gone up. You've heard about antisocial behaviour. Public order has gone up 29%. That's about public gatherings, mainly to do with COVID. And drugs have gone up by 52%. And I think quite a lot of that is that there's been a more proactive approach. The various lockdowns has enabled the force to concentrate more on drugs, county lines and dealing, etc. So that has actually gone up 52%. So although that sounds pretty startling, I think it's quite good news that we know that this drug dealing is going on. If we can get more people charged and either put away or big fines, that will, decrease the risk on our vulnerable people here in Nuneaton. So that's crime figures. A little bit about the transformation. As you all know, we came out of the alliance with West Mercia Police now back in, I think it was April 2019. So since that time, there's been a lot of transformation and restructuring of the force, and the Chief Constable has been able to rebuild the force from the bottom up, deciding what is needed in Warwickshire now, rather than perhaps what was needed in Warwickshire in Victorian times. So that's been, I think, a great bonus and a privilege to be able to do that. So most of the services are now stood up alone in Warwickshire. There are 42 police services, categories of police service. 38 of them are now up and running, established in Warwickshire, many of which had been run from Hindlip in Worcestershire. I think that's good news. They can now focus on Warwickshire residents and can respond to Warwickshire incidents and all those things. So I'm pleased about that. One or two good things happening this year. Firstly, the new control room, and that's when you ring 999 or 101, is opening this spring. That's in Warwick, moving from Leek Wootton. State-of-the-art kit, much better IT, should be a much better response time. They'll have far more information in the control room when a call is made, enabling them to do the threat, harm and risk assessment before deciding what resource, if any, to deploy. So pleased with that. The other is that we're looking at doing a forensic services collaboration. A lot of people ask me about, are we collaborating with other forces? We're going to want forensics, very expensive, very detailed, and we're going to be doing a collaboration with West Midlands Police, and they've got a lot more kit. They're plainly bigger than us, but I think that will be a better service for the force and a better service for our residents. This year, that was what we've called Evolve 1. There are 3 phases of Evolve, which is the transformation process. We're now in the middle of Evolve 2, and that is, we've looked at all the protective services, we've looked at all the administration of back office, if you like, and we've plainly looked at, or the Chief Constable has looked at operational matters, how to improve the service provided to residents. So that's going on, and with the increase in police officers. We are, out of interest, you'll be in March 2019, that's just under 2 years ago, we had 805 officers. As at today, we have 1,028, and I've provided the money in the next year's budget to increase that up to around 1,100. Warwickshire's never had 1,100 officers, and of course those additional officers will be spaced around the county based on crime and the fear of crime, and where the chief constable feels that he can deploy them to the best effect. So I think that's good news. A number of benefits have come recently out of those extra offices. So there's greater capacity and resilience to deal with the changing demand, and specifically with COVID-19. I think it's been really helpful. We've had those extra 200 officers. Where the harm protection and child sexual exploitation teams have been strengthened. The roads policing team have also been strengthened, as has the firearms capacity of the force. As you know, we've established, perhaps not so visible in Nuneaton and Bedworth, but we now have a dedicated rural crime team. They can focus on tackling those crimes in the rural areas, and that's been helpful. When I got this job, when I was elected, I felt that there wasn't much going on in policing in the rural areas, and that I think has been helpful to all of us. And indeed, some of those criminals operating in the rural areas will also be operating in urban areas. There's 2 vehicle crime teams have established, one in Bedworth on your patch and one down at Warwick, and they are specifically focusing on tackling vehicle crime. And I think you can see in those figures that has had some effect, but we'll see how it goes next year when we're out of the COVID pandemic. We've established 5 new safer neighbourhood team officers, bolstering those teams which needed to be right across the county. We've also got a new firearms licensing team at Leek Wootton, which is going well and working to the demand that it gets. And we are plainly, we've had to, when we came out of the alliance, we needed more control room inspectors, so they've also come in effect indirectly out of those extra numbers. So that's really some of the benefits of those numbers. Moving on to the budget and precept. I had the meeting earlier this week on Monday with the Police and Crime Panel. I don't think there's anybody on this call from the Police and Crime Panel, although there are representatives from Nuneaton and Bedworth. I said back in the autumn that the force, like any organisation, needs to balance its budget. And I asked them to find £4 million worth of savings by the 1st of April, which they have done. That has involved some quite difficult decisions. But that enables us now to be resilient going forward on a firm financial footing. And like all organisations, same as your council, COVID has put pressures on loss of income and indeed deploying of resources and overtime and all those sorts of extra costs. So it's important, I think, going forward that we have a balanced budget. We did some consultation, and we consulted on a £1.25 per month increase. The consultation came back with about a 2-to-1, 67% in favour, providing they got more bucks for their bang. So that will include 41 extra police officers next year, and a number of other teams being strengthened, the new control room I've mentioned, and more money going to actually domestic abuse charities, as that, as you know, is a concern and a priority at the moment. So that went to the panel. They voted 90% to support it, and we now have that balanced budget going forward, and I think that will increase the effectiveness and the efficiency of Warwickshire Police to be able to give a better service to us all. In our own office, part of those savings, I've saved 135,000 in my office for next year, which I think is right thing to do if we're asking the force to cut. We've been working from home remotely like most similar offices, and we actually have a new chief executive. I think most of you remember Neil Hewison. He retired at the end of January. I've got a new chief executive, Polly Reid, who's come from the West Midlands OPCC, and has settled in well and is getting cracking. And I'm sure when she's able to, she will be travelling up to meet you in Nuneaton. We've been now going through the grants process, which has just closed. I've had a number of applications from organisations in Nuneaton and Bedworth. We've had, of course, as always, we've had more applications than we've got funds, but they will be evaluated as sort of, are they following what the priorities of my police and crime plan, and the money will then be allocated to those organisations. We have a number of commission services now, which are contracts between 3 and 5 years for some of the bigger organisations. For example, victim support, they get about 700,000 from my office, keeps them busy and going, and all sorts of other, Bernardo's, ROSA, and many others, Change Grow Live, which is about drugs and alcohol treatment, and lots of other organisations who are helping us to eliminate crime, to reduce crime, and to, particularly support victims of crime when they're in their hour of need. There's a number of other grants which you'll know about, which we've continued. They're on the commission side. The cybercrime advisors, hope you see them up in your neck of the woods. They're available. Business crime advisor, trading standards officers, and of course the CSP analysts. That's community. That's, I think, NABSCOP. All the analysis for all the data and crime figures and data that NABSCOP get is all funded by my office. The small grants we're going to be evaluating within the next month to a total of about 241,000. Applications, I said, are now closed, and we've had 45 applications for considerably more than 241,000. So some work to be done and some choices and decisions to be made there. The Road Safety Fund, this is money that I get from those of you or me who are caught speeding. As you probably know, you have the option of taking 3 points and a fine or going on a speed awareness course. Now, the speed awareness course costs about the same as the fine, and my office, we receive, I think it's about £45 per attendee, which is quite right. So that money goes into road safety work. And it's principally from my offices on the education side. County Council or the Highway Authority, they will do the engineering works, and plainly Warwickshire Police are there to do the enforcement of roads, of laws on the roads. But we've been able to fund a number of organisations to do with road safety. And that isn't just drivers, that's motorcyclists, ordinary cyclists, pedestrians, horse riders, anyone else who, HGV drivers, anyone else who uses the road. We try to educate them to the fact that they need to stick to the rules of the road. They need to understand there are other road users, and that most of them are principally driving a dangerous weapon, which needs to be properly controlled. During the COVID-19 crisis, a lot of the organisations we support, they needed a bit more help. They needed more funds, and we gave out quite a lot of, I think we did about 60,000 of sort of emergency grants to enable them to continue producing the service they do for us. The Community Safety Partnership funding, this year we're allocating 86,000 to NABSCOP. That will be decided on locally as to how that be spent. And I think it's right that some of the money I delegate and some of those decisions are delegated locally so that you can make the absolute best possible effect of those funds locally in Nuneaton and Bedworth. We want to try and improve the collaboration across community safety partnerships, and we want to prioritise where the greatest need and we get the best value for money. So there's some questions and evaluation to be going on there. And finally, I've noticed Councillor Condorcet talked about elections, a bit more political. They are on the 6th of May. I know half the borough is up for election, all the county council, and indeed the PCC election, where they will be on until they're not. I know a lot of the electoral returning officers are doing their bit about understanding that they won't be able to have polling stations where there are vaccination centres, for example. So a lot of thoughts going in from the electoral registration officers to make this an election that is as fair and as democratic as can possibly be. But this information comes from central government. The decision will be made there. And who knows, if we get another variant or another surge they may well be postponed to a later date. So that's all I know at the moment. Of course, will be the purdah period, and voting will be on the 6th of May. To answer Councillor Condacor's question, all political parties should not be distributing leaflets, knocking doors, as that is considered, I think quite rightly, to be potentially spreading the disease. And all of us are abiding by those rules until they are lifted. And plainly, hopefully they won't be lifted in April, so that political parties can get out and do a bit of campaigning. But we'll just have to wait and see what these instructions come from the Cabinet Office, and we'll have to wait and see. So I think that's a quick run through, Councillor Longdon. If anyone has any questions on any of that or anything else, I will do my best to answer them.
Thank you very much, Philip. Comprehensive report there. Mrs. Condacor first, please.
Thank you. Just a couple of points I wanted to sort of raise, and a few questions coming out from what you've just said. You mentioned firearm licensing and that sort of more people doing that and things. Is that something that has now become cost neutral? Because I know a few years back there was quite a sort of lot of publicity that it was actually costing police services money to actually do these licensing because of all the checks and what have you that had to be done. So it's not something I've ever had an interest in terms of actually having one. So I have no idea what it involves, but it's something that only affects a small number of people. So therefore, I feel that they should be actually, paying enough for the license that it covers the costs and things. So I'd be interested to know about that. Obviously, some of the figures are good to see, particularly like the reduction in burglary. But of course, I think that might well go up in due course once things get back to a bit more normality, because at the moment so many people are at home, so you're far less likely to get burgled. So obviously, although it's a good thing, it's something we need to be very careful of, because it almost certainly will bounce back someday. Good to hear about the vehicle crime units and things. Obviously, a lot of people who are having vehicle crime, what have you, actually are involved in all sorts of other illegal activities. So that is actually a good thing. The other thing I wanted to just ask a little bit about, you mentioned sort of the increase in the number of officers and things, but there have also been a lot of redundancies or potential redundancies and things. And I'm just concerned that we're getting more officers, but not more officers with experience. And in any job, experience is very, very important. I've seen it in all sorts of fields. My father was in the education field. He got made redundant, took early retirement with all the sort of reorganisation that happened at the time. But then, of course, he was one of the older ones who had all the experience. So then he was actually had to be re-employed as a consultant because no one else knew how to do half the things. So I'm very concerned, that a lot of experience is disappearing, particularly with the domestic abuse officers and things, and just generally in investigation. I heard all sorts of things. I did watch what you said on the crime panel on Monday, was it? Thanks. But how do you justify losing a lot of experienced people? Thank you.
Okay, shall I answer that?
Yes,
first?
please. Yes, please.
Yeah. I mean, there are a host of questions in there. Thank you. Firstly, firearms licensing. I'm actually waiting to see at the end of this year how the figures balance out. But what I do know, it is cheaper for our taxpayers to run than it was when we were in the Alliance. In other words, we're paying less for the service than we were in the Alliance. Charging is on a national basis. We don't set the charges ourselves. So there are different charges for shotguns and rifles and storage of ammunition, etc., etc. So I'll have to see how that comes on. But it's quite a lean but efficient department. And it is costing us less than it was within the Alliance. Burglary, you're right. Of course, a lot of that is due to COVID, but the point I was trying to make was there have been less victims of burglary. That has to be a good thing. And plainly, we need to concentrate on, when we begin to come out of the pandemic, that people help protect themselves. There's a good police response. We interrupt gangs and organised crime who are carrying out burglaries. So lots of work there to be done. But I was just really pointing out that it is good news there are less victims right across the county, and certainly in Nuneaton and Bedworth. Vehicle crime, yes, you're quite right. They do stop drug runners. They do stop gangs doing and individuals committing other sorts of crime. But the actual vehicle crime it has dropped, and that's another thing we're going to have to look out for. Catalytic converters, people stealing cars or taking parts of cars to take back and either sell or use in other vehicles, etc. It's important, but yeah, you're right. They do pick up a lot of other criminals along the way. Redundancies. I mean, I could speak for 2 or 3 hours on this. I don't want to do that. All I would say, this is a decision by the Chief Constable. This is about implementing a plan that will last for 5 to 10 years. The majority of the redundancies are actually coming in the police staff investigators. Now, there were no police staff investigators in Warwickshire Police up till about 2012, when we began to get into the austerity period. There was a shortage of detectives nationally. So the decision was made to, most of them, ex-police officers with detective experience were brought in, and it is now being decided that they were staff and they did not have full warranted powers. This is the same for the DAROs, the domestic abuse relationship officers. At the moment, they do not have full warranted powers. They do not have the ability to arrest and take to custody, and the officers have a safeguarding responsibility above that of our staff. I want to say that it has been a really difficult decision for the Chief Constable. It has plainly involved individuals, families with mortgages to pay and other liabilities, has put them in an extremely difficult position. And I very much hope that they will be able to either retire if they're of that sort of age, or they will be able to find other jobs. What I have asked, I ask this every week, the proper mitigation has been put in to assist anyone who is subject to a redundancy, and also to make sure that they are paid fully on the statutory redundancy payments. So there's not a lot more to say to that. Some people say to me, this is about police officers replacing staff. They're doing a different job. And I think because of the extra police officers we've got, which most people tell me they want, I think I want to see those police officers in the organisation spread right across it and doing their job. So probably enough on that. Dave Patterson, have you got anything to add on firearms licensing? Have you got any more up-to-date information on that?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. My name is Dave Patterson. I work for the Commissioner and is lead for the Scrutiny and Performance role. Unfortunately, no, it's not really an area of business that I study a great deal, unfortunately. So nothing further to add.
Yeah, well, we'll be getting more figures on that, and plainly we'll see how it looks.
Right, thank you, Philip. Councillor Sargent.
Good evening, Philip.
Good evening.
I'd just like, I don't know, I know you can't give me the breakdown now, but I'd like for a further meeting whether you could give me a breakdown on the new officers as they come through as male or female, so we can see what the take is up on that going forward.
Well, we've just had some very updated information on that. Warwickshire, over the last 12 months, has increased its percentage of females within the force within Warwickshire Police more than any other force in the country. So the Chief Constable is very proud of that. At the moment, we're about 35%. There's more to go. We're all aware that there are more women now than men in society, and I feel that the force should reflect the society it is policing. This is the same plainly with ethnic minorities and others. But there has been a really good performance indicator on women in policing. and we're all pleased with that, and they bring just as much as a male police officer to the force. So by all means, contact the office if you want a bit more detail on numbers, but that is good. And obviously the new recruits, to increase that percentage, have had a higher percentage as we go forward.
Thank you.
That's lovely, thank you.
Councillor Elliott.
Sorry, thanks, Chair. Yeah, lots of statistics and figures, but Mr. Seckham, you talk about making difficult decisions and £4 million of savings. You kind of dress that up in a way that this is offering better service to residents in Nuneaton and Bedworth. How difficult a decision, and what savings were involved in doubling the police force in rural areas, which is one of your headline statistics? 52% increase in drugs crimes due to your proactive approach, which is to be applauded. But that could be inferred that you're taking a less proactive approach in other areas, seeing just a 2% rise, as you put it, in domestic violence. It could be inferred that you are taking the opposite to a proactive approach, perhaps an inactive approach, which would be backed up by dissatisfaction with, I have some statistics here, with a sharp rise in dissatisfaction with the way that crimes are being handled within the county. The figures I have, which are saved images from the internet, from the police internet that have disappeared now, show a massive increase in crime, maybe down a little bit this year for obvious reasons. So my question is, what are your £4 million of difficult savings? I think that's been touched upon. Are they difficult decisions for, say, victims of domestic violence, as opposed to, I don't know, I mean, car crime is definitely important. I'm not saying it's less important, but you've put more police on the roads. Where are your priorities? Are they perhaps not in the area that our residents need those priorities to be? But also, I just wanted to ask about the crime survey. You said that I think there was a 2-to-1 approval of increasing the precept. I tried to complete that crime survey. It wouldn't let me if you didn't agree to pay that extra council tax. So it seems quite a manipulation of people's opinions to say that everybody that completed the crime survey agreed, where those who are dissatisfied and don't feel that they should pay more council tax because the services they value are not there or they're not visible to them. You talked about increasing the response time to the 101 line, which people have rung that. People have tried to report crimes through the internet, which you talked about last time, encouraging people to report crimes via the internet rather than 101. There is a lot of dissatisfaction. Improvements are needed there. So two questions really. Where are the 4 million savings, and how many people do you think really agreed with the precept increase, with the fairly disingenuous crime survey report? Thank you.
Okay, once again, a number of points there. I'll try and address them briefly if I can. as far as the drugs policing has been concerned during COVID, that is not taking anybody off any other jobs. That's a lot of that's been done by our safer neighbourhood teams. That is their job, to solve problems and understand the locality and try and intercept dealers and drug takers committing a crime. So I don't quite accept that just because they've been concentrating on drugs, it's taken the eye off the ball on any other sorts of crime, because they all have to be policed. But I think particularly during the COVID outbreak, with many of our streets fairly empty, and I'm sure Nuneaton town centre fairly empty, it was actually easier to spot drug takers. People on our roads dropped dramatically. So drug dealers were able to, and a lot of people were driving about without insurance and tax, and lo and behold, you stop them, and then there are illicit drugs in the car, or counterfeit goods and that sort of thing. So I think it all helps to crack down on crime and reduce crime, and that's what it's about. And I just don't accept that the domestic abuse response has been any less. It's been greater, because there have been more calls. I'm sure you're aware, the custody suite over Christmas, over half the occupants there were perpetrators of domestic abuse. They had been arrested. They had been brought in because a victim had reported the crime, and they'd done something about it quickly. So I don't really accept that. By the way, these are nearly all operational matters, and probably questions for Chief Inspector Faulkner rather than me, but very happy to try and help. The crime figures are what they are. That's what people report. Now, not everybody reports a crime, I get that, but the police can really only go on those calls that are made. And I think that the fact that the number of people reporting crime has gone down indicates to me that the amount of crime has gone down, and there's no other way of measuring it. You can't do it anecdotally. I'll finish on the £4 million. Just on the it wasn't really a crime survey, it was a precept survey on what we felt. We asked the population to come back to us on what they thought about the increase in precept. There was actually the option to say no increase, and 33% of people said that. So that was interesting. The 2/3 were prepared to pay more, providing they got more service for the extra money. So that's how those figures came about. But 33% said, I don't want to pay any more. Now, there are plenty of people who say, I don't want to pay any more taxes. And if you ask them, they'll say no. But the majority of people, by 2 to 1, said that they would be prepared to pay more, providing they got more for their money. And that's what I've set out earlier on in my few words. I think the other thing that's worth saying is those that live in properties that are smaller and of lesser value than a Band D will pay less. Students pay nothing. They don't pay any council tax at all. People on benefits often are helped with their council tax payment by the welfare payments. So this will be particularly aimed at the more wealthy in our society. If you like, it's almost a means-tested tax. So those who live in bigger houses will pay more. And I think that's fair. So going and just on to before I do the savings, I did mention single online home. That is increasing all the time, the use of it. It's doubled over the last, probably since I came to see you or joined you in October. So more people are doing online reporting, and that is really helpful, because the control room, I've been there many times, it has peaks when it's really busy, then it can be quite quiet for a bit. So I think it helps if those can report online. They can then be dealt with after the peak of demand, maybe in the 2 or 3 in the morning or something, or the next day, where if it is a 101 matter. But the key to the control room is that 999 calls are answered promptly. And the last set of figures I've seen is we have an average of them being asked within 4 seconds. That's not bad. And the response time for 101 calls is now under a minute. It had been up at 1.5 or 2 minutes. Now, I bet that compares really well with Severn Trent or any British Gas or any other utility company will not be answering calls on average within a minute. So I think that is improving. Bit further to go, but that's improving. So the costs, having come out of the alliance, Warwickshire Police had a number of major financial challenges. And we would have had some if we'd stayed in the alliance. But my job is to provide a force, or the chief constable, with enough money to run an effective force, but also to have a resilient funding package behind it. Now, if we hadn't have made those 4 million cuts the way we did, I'll invite you to say, where else could we cut? And it's a really difficult decision. So you have to weigh up the options and take that decision. And us all as elected members, that's what we're here for. We're elected to make those decisions. Some of them are difficult, some of them are easier on behalf of our residents. So the £4 million, most of it has gone in taking off our establishment 124 members of staff. Now, fortunately, 50 of those positions were vacant. So it now affects 80 members of staff, and that is reducing all the time. Some are getting other jobs and leaving. Some are deciding to apply for other jobs within Warwickshire Police that are available. So I'm anticipating it might be 50 to 60 at the end of the day, but that is a guess, and please don't hold me to that figure. But the maximum is 70 at the moment. But those 124 posts, taking them out of the establishment, this would be the same if you did it in the borough, produces considerable savings, millions of pounds worth of savings. So that is the bulk of the 4 million. There are other areas where we have asked the force to make efficiency savings, but without affecting the service. In my own office, we've made some savings, and I think the Chief Constable has come up to me with a package that is acceptable to me. I understand the rationale behind it. It's difficult, but I understand the rationale behind it. And it's actually I was elected to keep Warwickshire safe, not to employ people. And I value all the people. A lot of the people who are going are good people. They've got a lot of experience, and I wish them all the very best in the future. But at the end of the day, I have to produce a force that is efficient, that is effective, and that is properly funded. Dave, I don't know whether you've got any more to add. There are a number of points there.
I think you could.
Yeah, just a couple. Obviously, the 101 performance in the control room last week was 39 seconds to the call to be answered, and it's remained below a minute for the last month. In terms of victim satisfaction rates, the force measure a number of different crime types. The 6-month rolling average, the victim satisfaction rate for burglary is at 90%, vehicle crime is at 81%, and violence is at 76%, which we think is acceptable. We also measure victim satisfaction for domestic abuse and for hate crime as well. And there has been a bit of a problem with COVID-19 and having a sufficient sample size for domestic abuse. So it's not statistically significant, but it has dipped. That's acceptable. The reasons why is because of the vulnerability of the victims being at home with perhaps a perpetrator. So say the sample size has reduced and it has declined, but I don't think it's statistically significant at this moment in time.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. Councillor Evans.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Philip, before I go on to my two questions, I just wanted to share an incident with you that took place in Bedworth 2 days ago, where 2 teenagers were found by Warwickshire Police to be suspected victims of modern slavery. And we've both walked the streets of Bedworth. We've walked around Coalpit Fields and the Dock Estate, and you just wouldn't expect a town like Bedworth to suffer from that sort of crime. So I really just wanted to make sure that the issue of modern slavery is very much on the agenda of the PCC's office. Can I just ask my first question? Obviously, you presented your budget, didn't you, to the Police and Crime panel, I believe, last week. Did that receive support, did it?
I can answer that. Yes, 90% support. All members supported it except one who voted against it and one who abstained.
Right. Okay. Okay. Because I've seen a number of councillors being somewhat critical of the increase in the precept, but it seems that their colleagues then vote a different way on the police and crime panel. So I thought that was quite interesting. The other thing I wanted to raise, Philip, was there's been a lot of speculation from a certain individual on Twitter about the future of domestic abuse risk officers in Warwickshire, and I just wondered if you could put your side of the story on public record, if that's possible. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, fine. Firstly, yes, the modern slavery incident in Bedworth is very serious, and I know you think it won't go on in Bedworth. It does. We had an incident in Stratford last year with considerably more victims than there have been in Bedworth, and this is often about employers not paying people properly, keeping employees who can be immigrants or can be disadvantaged or vulnerable people under outrageous conditions. And it is really important. It's part of my police and crime plan, and I absolutely raised the topic with the force as soon as I heard about it. And we need to make sure that the perpetrator of that particular crime is brought to justice as soon as possible to try and deter it happening again in Warwickshire. But it goes on. I mean, it's extraordinary. It goes on in our so-called civilized society, and it is outrageous. The budget question I've answered. Right, the DAROs, as I said, I don't want to spend too long on this. This is about replacing, we have, I think it's 10 DAROs altogether, of which 5 have already gone. So we're talking about 5 people who are good operators, have experience, and have been a great bonus and boost to the force. But the chief constable has decided not to axe the whole team, but actually to bring in a new team of 11 warranted police officers to do that job. As I said earlier, up till 2012, it was always a police officer's job. It was never a member of staff's job. But those officers will have extra powers to be able to visit victims, and if the perpetrator is there, to be able to arrest them, take them to custody, and do what is right for a victim who is suffering domestic abuse. And I see there's been things on social media that says that these officers will only be part-time, they'll be doing other things. They will not. They will be concentrating 100% on domestic abuse. I've also seen comments that they will be sitting in offices all the time. Not true. They will be out and about, meeting and looking after the interests of, and signposting and making sure the force does what is right for a victim of domestic abuse. So I having thought it all through, I'm convinced that the public of Warwickshire will get a better service out of this. There'll be more people in it. They will have more power, and they will be concentrating on looking after the interests of any victim of domestic abuse, be they male or female, across the county. As I said, I'm really keen that anyone who is subject to redundancy is given every possible help and advice and support from the force, and given good references if they want to join another force or if they want to join another organisation, and all those sorts of things. But it's difficult. I didn't get this job to make people redundant. I didn't actually get this job to put up taxes either, but I did get it to ensure that we have the best possible police service we can get at the best possible value for money.
Thank you, Philip. Councillor Golby.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for your in-depth report back, Philip. It is much appreciated. I would like to point out a few things that have been mentioned before that have shown, quite frankly, a distinct lack of operational awareness. The rural crime, can we just be clear about the rural crime team? We're talking about tens of officers, not hundreds of officers here. So
well, I can answer that straight away. It started with 6.
Yeah.
It's now 12.
Right. So
out of the extra 200 officers, it's 6%.
So for urban areas, we are not going to be seeing a massive drop in policing like was intimated by a previous speaker.
Absolutely not.
I would
Almost.
also.
Can I just ask you to stop, Philip? Claire, carry on, please. Let Philip answer the questions.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Instead of trying to have a conversation across the two of you.
Okay. I would also like to take the opportunity to reassure people who may be suffering from any form of domestic abuse. I don't like it when cuts to domestic abuse services are used in the way that is being here, which is an under the table inference that that domestic abuse is being cut in some way. I want to reassure people that there are services out there for anybody that is suffering any sort of abuse within their home, and potentially even more so now that's exacerbated by COVID. And there is a phone number which is 0800 408 1552 that anybody can call if they suspect domestic abuse is going on, or if they are suffering from domestic abuse. Phone it, get some help. You do not have to suffer any form of domestic abuse in your own home by anybody. Failing that, phone 999 and the police will attend, despite what may have been inferred earlier on, which again, be careful with the words because it's not helpful. Also, with the modern slavery, again, we had reference to drugs earlier on and the rise in drugs and 52% or 56%, I'm not entirely sure, I can't remember. However, I do understand, again, operationally, it's because you've had the availability and a clearer line of sight to the people who are committing these crimes. Therefore, you can nick them easier. People are reporting them more, so you can nick them easier. It's making the police's life slightly easier, and the flow of information, I certainly understand the flow of information has been increased on this. So again, I didn't like the inference that was made with regards to this, but modern slavery also feeds into the drugs trade. People are modern slaves. They are locked in houses and forced to grow cannabis, and they are usually, like you said, not from this country, and they are brought over here simply to lock up in houses to grow cannabis, and they're an easy patsy if the door gets kicked in. They are modern slaves, and it is happening in every environment that you can think of. But there are some good things that I've experienced recently with in the last 12 months at least, even with COVID. And I would like to actually put this back to yourself, Philip, to feed back into the force whenever possible. The SNT team who are assigned to the area, the Arbury area, are very, very good at getting in contact, and also me having direct contact with them. I can't fault them. They've worked really, really hard under some really trying circumstances in the last 12 months, I have to say, but they've been really, really good. And I'd just like to pass that on, and the thanks should be given. And also the Safer Neighbourhoods team for Nuneaton, who have taken to Facebook, doing Facebook Q&As on one of the largest Facebook forums on the local Nuneaton scene, and that has been really successful. And again, it's direct communication with people, and it's grown in popularity, and there's been lots and lots of positive feedback. So again, the positive feedback needs to go up the chain and say that it's a really good idea, and people like it. And also, it's not that costly either. So I was happy to help out with that where I could, and when it comes again, I will be happy to help out in doing something similar. So I'd just like to leave that on a positive note, that not everything is doom and gloom, and people are trying their best in very, very trying circumstances, and credit should be given where it's due. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm not sure how many questions were in there, Philip, but if you can pick any up, yes, please do. You're muted. You're muted, Philip.
Sorry, it was when you shut me up, Councillor. I muted myself.
I wouldn't dare shut you down.
So, yeah, I repeat again, there are no cuts to the domestic abuse relationship officer team. And I'll say that as often as I can. It'll be replaced by police officers who have greater powers, who have extra safeguarding responsibilities. Social media, yeah, I'm not a great fan of social media. I think it's a forum. We live in a relatively free country. But a lot of things are said on there that are knee-jerk reactions. People don't understand the background or the rationale for decisions, and that's the way I take comments, whether they're adverse or indeed they are friendly. Drug dealers, yeah. I mean, what the police need to do, and why it's been easier under COVID, is we want to take dealers and users off our streets, out of our homes, out of our buildings, to crack down on all sorts of drugs, whatever class they are. And, that's really what it's about. And you're right, during the pandemic, it has been easier to spot these people. There have been more reports from our residents, which is good. And yeah, it's a high priority. I will pass on your thanks to the Arbury Safer Neighbourhood team. And actually, I hope all of you have the sorts of relations with your Safer Neighbourhood team. You know all of them, you speak to them regularly. You are, if you like, community leaders, and I think people will come to you with problems that you can get straight in touch with the Safer Neighbourhood team that they can deal with. And if they can't deal with it, they obviously have the ability to bring in other assets from the force. Yeah, I'm all in favour of all officers engaging with the public, and there are lots of forums about. I've actually had some complaints that some of the forums are closed. So I think they need to go to open forums. I think it's not right that police go to closed forums, if I'm honest. But yeah, I encourage any form of engagement. Obviously, this what we're on tonight is a pretty good way of engaging with people, teams, and it does mean we can all sit at home and talk to other people, which is great.
Thank you, Councillor Hancox. You'll be the last speaker.
Well, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to start with, as I said earlier on, I think we should pass on our thanks through Mr. Seckham for all the efforts that the police and emergency services have been doing, particularly through this difficult time. But Chair, what I wanted to say was, traditionally, the amount of funding and police numbers has been disproportionate to the north of the county to the south, and again in particular to Bedworth and Nuneaton. So I'm really interested in how the funding and police numbers that have been mentioned is going to be shared across the county. Clearly there's a bigger demand around Bedworth and Nuneaton than there is some parts of the south of the county. The increase in the increase in police numbers is going to be 41. I'm interested to know how many of them will be into the Bedworth and Nuneaton area, and it's just been mentioned actually about the importance of our safer neighbourhood teams, and I think it's really important that they are increased and supported as well as we can do that. I couldn't quite get my head around, maybe I'm a bit dim, but I couldn't quite get my head around about the cutting of £4 million against the increase in more officers. And I do have to say, Chair, I'm not going to repeat everything that's been said by other people and what I've seen in other places, but I am concerned about the domestic abuse team. And I think, Mr. Seckham saying it's going to be much improved. Well, I think as a scrutiny panel, we need to keep our eye on that and make sure that is something that's an agenda item in 12 months' time. Yeah, so I'll finish on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hancox. Yeah, I'll start with the last. Yeah, that's a fair challenge. That's a very fair challenge. and let's see how the force perform. And my job is obviously to hold the force to account to make sure that it is an improved team, but it'll have more resource, it'll have more powers, and let's see how it operates on the ground, in your case particularly in Nuneaton and Bedworth. So funding, I give the Chief Constable the funding. It is his job to deploy his troops, if you like, and as to where everybody should go. But I can confirm that the response to the police and the if you like, the positioning of the police is about where the threat and the crime is happening. I know there's been a historic argument that more resources go to the south or go to the north. I don't believe it. I think there's probably more assets in the north, if I'm honest, and the south may have also tell me all the same things as you told me. But you know, where the crime is, where the threat is, where the areas of deprivation are, where the police need to be is where they are. And all I can say, there's an extra 200 of those now who will be able to improve the policing in your area. The extra 41 officers, of course, the new recruits will go straight into response, which is the 999 teams of response. That's where you learn the trade. But that will release another 41 officers to go into all the other teams. And I've mentioned some of them. The DAROs, there'll be some going into police staff investigators. At the moment, there'll be some going into the specialist child sexual exploitation teams. There'll be some going, I hope, into the vehicle crime team, some into the other teams, and it'll give the, for example, at the moment there's a really good operation going on in Rugby called Operation Spigot, which is about trying to eliminate knife crime from the streets of Rugby, and they've had some terrific success. They've arrested and stopped and searched. They've done everything they can to deter people from carrying knives in Rugby. And as a result, knife crime has dropped a bit. Now, that's a good use of police resource, I think. Keeps us all safer. We have 32 safer neighbourhood teams across the county. A lot of people tell me, you know, there's a bit of a turnover in them, and they, you know, they get one PCSO or they get an officer and then they move on. I mean, I've tried to make sure that the Chief Constable keeps those teams as constant as possible with as minimal amount of change. Actually, PCSOs are quite good. They tend to change less, but officers do change or get promoted or asked to get to do another job. So all I would say, the extra 200 officers was paid for by the council taxpayers of Warwickshire, not by the government, by the council taxpayers of Warwickshire. So I regard those 200 extra officers as an asset that we have paid for locally, that I have a responsibility to make sure they're properly deployed. And, you know, to get up to 1,100 officers has been one of my aims. I think it's the right thing to do. Most people feel safer when they see officers, when they know there are more officers, you know, trying to reduce crime and apprehending perpetrators. So if that's the last question, Councillor Longdon, thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak and answer questions. I will come back if re-elected during the new term and report to you on progress of a lot of the items you've raised tonight. And it has been a pretty comprehensive cross section of a lot of the work that the force do, and I hold them to account. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Philip, and thank you, David, for being the backup man. I won't be here, Philip. You might be, but I certainly won't be. I'm getting out.
Okay.
I'm going one way or another. I'm going. I see Councillor Golby's got a hand up, but I did say Councillor Hancock's was the last member, and I think we've given it a fair crack based on this oral report. So I'm not going to bring you back in, Claire. I'm sorry, but
it's the historic hand anyway, Chair. It's fine. It's the historic hand anyway.
Oh, is it? Oh, right.
Yeah, it's fine.
You take it down, did you? Okay, thank you. Thank you both. And thank you very much for your report. Good night. Right. The next item has been deferred. Community Safety Partnership, that's gone. Is anybody there? There's something gone.
Yes, we're here, Chair.
Everybody's there. Okay, thank you.
Well, I am.
All I got was David Patterson up. For some reason now my screen's gone peculiar. I don't know why that should be.
Can you see Councillor Hancock's? I think it's just because you were the only person with their camera on.
I'm thinking it was the end, but there you go.
No, it's not the end. No.
I'm still here.
Got 2 days to go yet. Right, Community Safety Partnership Performance Plan report has been deferred. The forward plan is for noting only, so I'll take that as noted. The revised work programme, I haven't got anything on that to say. I don't think any member has.
Just noted, Chair.
Just noted. Can't see anybody with the hands up. Okay, thank you for that. So we're now moving into item 12, any other business, which is the report from David Altringham from the GEH, which everybody's had. David couldn't get here, and Jenny Northcote couldn't get here either. So because they're tied up very, as you would expect, very tight with COVID and the services the NHS is providing. So if there is any questions, as I said, Ingrid has put some questions in already. Any questions, please get them into Victoria by 5 o'clock tomorrow. Otherwise, they won't go forward, and they'll be collated and put to them. I'm not sure when we'll get an answer back from them, but as soon as we do, they'll be reported back to the committee. Any comments on that? No.
Councillor Hancock has his hand up, Chair.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Okay, Bill. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Not directly to that report, but again, as I've said on twice already, through you, Chair, we can pass our thanks on to everybody at the George Eliot and the NHS for all the work that they've done during this difficult time, and also give some recognition to the George Eliot for their swift the swift actions in naming a ward after Captain Tom. I think that was actually brilliant of them. Thank you, Chair.
I didn't know that. You've put new news. Thank you. Right, nobody else?
Apologise if I've got it wrong, but...
Nobody else? My screen's gone a bit peculiar again. Is anybody there?
Yes, we're here, Chair. I think it's just because you're the only one with the camera on.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Right. So there's nothing else that I've been advised of. So thank you for turning up. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your contributions. And good night. Thank you.
Okay. Enjoy the rest of your